So just while people are gathering in seats, I might just begin with a bit of a welcome and a thank you for coming along. My name's Rob Feeney. I'm a partner with AT Kearney, and for my sins, I lead up a lot of our digital and technology work that we do in this part of the world. Very excited to have you here today. This is a fascinating topic, and I was sort of talking to some of my colleagues about why this is of such interest at the moment. And we've sort of agreed that there's probably three things that are fascinating. The first one is that this is something that seems to have had its moment. It's arrived, if you like, as a topic. So I could have talked about this a couple of years ago, and I suspect that we'd have maybe one or two people interested in sitting in the room. At the moment, though, there's obviously quite a lot of buzz in the press around AI, automation, and what have you. So that's one thing. The second thing is that it's one of those topics that everyone has probably read a bit about. So I'm imagining that as we talk today and as we have this conversation, there are some people here who know quite a lot about this and are quite deep. And I'm imagining that there are some people here who are sort of have read a couple of articles and are trying to understand more. Just bear that in mind, please, as we try and bridge the topic. That there will be some people who are deep experts in this, and there are some people who will be relatively green. And then the last reason that this is interesting, and this is a call out, is that this is a little bit of a scary topic. There's a little bit of fear here. This is a little bit of the unknown. What does this mean? What does this mean to me? What does it mean for my jobs? What does it mean for my children? And so all of those topics, all of those reasons, I think, are why this is a popular and engaging topic. Now, as I said, we're going to try and cover a range of different areas here and a range of different knowledge topics. I am hoping that you will finish this session with more questions than you've come in with. I certainly don't expect to answer all of your questions. Let me just set that expectation right now. And the reason that I don't expect that is that A, not all of these answers are known, and B, there are an awful lot of questions. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to try and cover off a number of different areas, and we've got a number of different colleagues here who are going to try and help us do that. So the first thing is that we're going to try and level set a little bit about what it is that we're talking about today. And Mark Soppe here, who works with me on a number of different clients on this topic, is going to try and do that and sort of create a scope of what we're talking about. We're also going to try and give a bit of a demonstration of what this might look like and explain. We've got a colleague here from IBM, Murray, over in the corner there, who's going to talk a little bit about what this might look like and what this looks like in practice, which will hopefully be helpful. Then Daria is going to talk a bit about what this might mean for Australia. And then I'm going to try and talk a little bit about what are some actions that either the government can take as policy actions, or we can help shape in our own backyard. We're going to try and do all of that in about an hour. There is a lot of content here, so I'm hoping that we'll be able to touch on most of the points. But again, I'm hoping that you'll leave here with more questions than we've arrived. So with that, I might hand over to Mark to kick us off. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Mark Soppe. I'm a principal in the digital practice, so that makes me one of the geeks in AT Kearney's consulting team. I'm pretty much exclusively focused on AI and robotics for the last 2 years, and what I wanted to do is give you an independent view of where I think the market's at the moment, and to sort of separate the reality of what's possible at the moment and where the market's going from the hype that you're seeing in the market as well. First, I'd like to begin just by getting a baseline, because I understand that there's a lot of people in the room who this might be a new topic for. This is a highly fragmented market. There's lots of vendors out there, lots of different technical solutions, but what I've tried to do is simplify it for you. If we talk about artificial intelligence and robotic process automation at a really simple level, what we're talking about is a group of technologies that are able to sense the world around them, they're able to reason with that information, and then they're able to perform some sort of action based on that. Now, there are hundreds of different technologies out there, but I've broken it into 5 groups just to make it simple for everyone. In the sensing world, this is the most mature part of the market. And there's two main groups of technologies there. There's natural language processing and computer vision. So in natural language processing, and this is where we're seeing some of the disruption at the moment in the market, this is where computers take information, linguistic information. It can be from a lot of sources. It can be from unstructured emails or unstructured text. It could be voice from someone calling. It could be a web-based form. It could be a lot of different things. And what it does is it understands the sentences and words you've got. It will then undergo semantic interpretation, which actually means it will try and understand the intent of what you're saying, not just traditional question and answers. It will understand the intent. It will measure additional things about you, like what is your sentiment? What's your mood, and is it changing as the call's going on? And then it will perform some sort of actions. We're seeing a lot of applications of this in call centres at the moment, and this is probably where we're seeing going forward some of the jobs being automated. We're also seeing it being used by companies for broader purposes. For example, what is the sentiment in the market from investors? What are our customer sentiments looking like? Then we have computer vision. And so in computer vision, it's very similar except it's using images. So we're pulling in an image, we're understanding the context, we're extracting information like objects, and then we're trying to act on it. And where we're seeing a bit of disruption there is actually in healthcare for medical diagnostic imaging, and we're also seeing it in manufacturing, for example, in identifying defects in the supply chain process. As we move to the think bit, this is where it's getting a little bit less mature. We see pattern recognition. And so pattern recognition is when you get big data, enormous amounts of data, and then you use statistics or templates or neural networks to identify patterns in the data. So you might, for example, be looking at buyer behaviour, or in financial services you might be using it for fraud detection. And then reasoning and optimisation is actually where there's a little bit more controversy. This is where you might see in the literature people talk about the new MBAs, managed by automation. And this is where you're actually using technology to actually inform decision making. Murray's got some great examples from Woodside, for example, where that's being used in the market at the moment. And finally, we have robotic process automation, which probably isn't as sexy as the others, but is actually probably having the most impact at the moment. This is much simpler. This is basic rules-based processing that takes structured digital inputs, and it's used to automate high-volume transactional activities. And we're seeing a lot of automation happening there in the back office of organisations. Probably the biggest example that we see there is Barclays, who've been able to reduce their operations from over 3,000 to under 1,000 jobs. So that's the current. Oh, there's one other theme here that's worth noting. There is an overall principle as we look at the technologies there. And you'll notice that on the right-hand side here, where there isn't much shading, we talk about general artificial intelligence. And on the left side, there's narrow artificial intelligence. And what we actually find is this broad-based artificial intelligence solutions that you see in the media actually aren't market ready for the most part. Instead, what we actually see is really discrete vertical solutions. And what does that mean for the fully automated workforce? Well, what that means is when I'm on projects and we're implementing these technologies, we're seeing parts of people's roles being automated, not whole roles, maybe 20 or 30%. So I actually at the moment don't see this huge transition from human resources to virtual resources right now. Instead, what I see is people being augmented by this technology. So the way you work is different, and the tools that you use to work are different, and people become more productive. If we look going forward, what I've done is plotted the classic S-curves here, and if we actually look at the adoption of the technologies, what we're seeing is robotic process automation looks like it's going to become highly adopted in the next year or two. Most organisations have done their proof of concepts already, they've demonstrated that it's technically feasible and the economics stack up, and they're beginning to implement that at scale. The artificial intelligence, however, if we split it out, we see supervised artificial intelligence sort of hitting the inflection point in the next 5 years, but unsupervised artificial intelligence, and this is where I see a lot of hype in the market, I see being more than a decade away. What does that actually mean? So again, what we're doing is we're moving back to the principle of augmentation, and we're actually seeing here that there are new roles being created by these technologies. So when I'm implementing this in clients, we have new roles where we call them robot supervisors. And these are people who actually need to manage this workforce. And when people look at this and I say, look, just think about it simply, right? They're just resources on your team. They need a computer, they need software, they need to be trained. Sometimes they need to be performance managed, just like people, right? And so what we'll actually see here is some supervised solutions coming through. And so as managers, what that will mean for you is you need to get used to the idea of managing a team that's comprised of both human and virtual resources. frame forward. Now the market out there, if we actually look at the vendor landscape, is highly fragmented. Just, I talked about the fact that the market-ready solutions are these use cases that are highly vertical, and that's reflected in the current market. So we have a whole lot of cognitive solutions there. There's actually, if you look at the US patents, probably over 3,000 artificial intelligence firms in the US alone, but there's some dominant global players. And then in the rules-based processing, we sort of have some dominant players there in terms of robotic process automation. But because it's fragmented, what we're actually now seeing is some convergence. So we're seeing RPA solutions investing in cognitive, say for example, automation anywhere for exception management. And we're seeing some more partnerships, for example, Blue Prism and IBM Watson. And what does that mean? What that means is you're actually able to increase your automation footprint because you're able to deal with more scenarios. One of the most common questions I get when people want to do this is they go, okay, so I want to do artificial intelligence, I want to do robotic process automation, who should I partner with? And the answer is because the market's fragmented, you actually need to partner with multiple vendors. So at the moment, companies are actually getting fairly limited benefits at the moment, and that's because they might implement one solution which is designed for a specific set of use cases, and you might be able to automate a set of roles. But where we're seeing organisations like Barclays and others actually expand their automation footprint is you actually then need to implement potentially several RPA solutions. For example, Automation Anywhere, which focuses on front office call centres, Blue Prism, which focuses more on back office areas. And then if you actually want to go further and you want to move away from structured digital inputs and have unstructured data sets that you can automate, you need to look at your cognitive solutions. This is your NLP. And if you want to be able to deal with ambiguous scenarios, not just simple dumb rules-based scenarios, we need to look at the reasoning-based cognitive solutions as well. So we're seeing this move towards a multi-technology mix. Now, if I compare that to the adoption though, this is where I sort of throw water on it a little bit. This is your classic sort of hype curve from Gartner, and what I've done is I've plotted the technologies we've talked about, and you can see most of the technologies we're talking about at the moment are actually in a hype phase. And what we typically see is that when emerging technologies come, they reach a level of hype and there's this huge expectation in the market that I can get all this benefit from it, but invariably the reality is something different from the hype. And what I see is we're probably going to go into this trough of disillusionment here. I don't want to understate the benefit of this. You can get benefit. But what I am saying is there is a disconnect between what I'm seeing in the media, for example, where I see stories where they're going, oh my God, 30 or 40% of jobs going in the next 5 years and things. Based on my independent experience having implemented different solutions in the real world with different clients, I don't see that at the moment. Rather than giving you death by PowerPoint though, we've got our friends from IBM Watson here. So I wanted to baseline the technology and give you a feel of what's possible. So I suppose you might ask why IBM Watson, and I suppose at AT Kearney we have lots of different partners in this space. There's sort of the research-based organisations, we have your startups, we have organisations that focus on the large blue chip corporations and commercial things, and then we also see people investing in R&D. And really, for this audience, IBM is really in that sweet spot between sort of having use cases that are targets for large organisations, but also leading the research and development in this space as well. So what I might do is hand it over to Murray Bruce, and we can actually do a demonstration of a cognitive tool, so you can get a bit of a feel of what's possible.
Thanks very much, Mark. Cheers. So Murray Bruce, I lead IBM Watson across Asia Pacific. Great to be with you this morning. It's interesting, we're stepping from an age where the work that we've done in IT with information management is all programmatic. So if something's in a row, a cell or a column, we sit there and say, if this, then this sells this. But when you walk up to a customer service desk, you have a discussion with a customer service agent. They're not asking you which row or cell it's in. They're not asking you to complete a field. They're having a discussion with you. And in the course of that discussion, the customer service representative is building a context of what it is you're trying to do. They're building an understanding. Hopefully they're having a level of empathy for what you are trying to achieve, and then they are working with you to solve that problem. A programmatic system doing an if-then-else approach isn't particularly suited to that sort of activity. And when we look at it, there's a whole heap of activities we do that our traditional computing construct of programmatic approaches, if then else, is not enabling us to do a number of things we could be doing. So a patient comes up to an oncologist and presents their symptoms, the oncologist at their best can only read so many journals, medical journals, on the latest research, the latest findings, the latest treatments, and make recommendations to the patient. What if we could aid the human cognition of that oncologist by saying, for these symptoms, we believe these are the types of cancer that could be prevalent, and this is our level of confidence. Right? But further to say, if you did these additional tests, this MRI, this pathology, this CT scan, we could improve that level of confidence. Now, is this capability, is that making the decision for the oncologist? No. Is it artificial intelligence? No. Is it augmenting intelligence? Yes. Right? So it's aiding a skilled professional to make a better decision, and the oncologist can sit there, that's bizarre, I don't follow that logic. Well, the oncologist can read the evidence behind that to know that's the right sort of decision. And that's the sort of thing that you're not going to find in a row or cell or a column. That's tens and hundreds of thousands of journal articles that oncologists, at their best, won't have their time to read through and understand. But aiding that human cognition is a very powerful construct, and these capabilities that Mark's mentioned across the market will make a powerful difference in transforming industries and a variety of industries. So I'll give you a few things to just baseline what this cognitive computing capability is, and I'll give you a few examples to back that up. So let me just jump through here. So in our own experience, we go and, in the military they refer to this as the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide and act. And we make decisions, much as that customer service agent, much as that oncologist, in taking in the surroundings and making a decision and acting. But in computers we haven't traditionally done that. But if we're looking to augment human capability, having a computer that acts in the way that humans do, observing the situation, understanding that information that's presented to them, be it in voice, be it in text, images, video, and then reasoning on the basis of it, and then learning as you go. That is a very powerful and different construct. Now, is this saying that we're going to get rid of our SAP systems, we're going to get rid of our data warehouses and what have you? No. In the 4 years I've been working in this cognitive space, we haven't pulled out a single system. We have complemented a heap of capabilities. And the other thing I might add is, you might sit there and say, oh, this sounds big. This sounds like multi-million-dollar investment. This sounds like a ginormous project that will take us many years to complete. Well, when I started working with Woodside back in 2014, we spent many months consulting with them around what sort of use cases would we choose. And then we spent probably another 12 months getting a use case into production. It was around lessons learned. And that was a very powerful use case. I'll give you a quick example of that. But now we've got a lot more patterns of the way clients have been using these capabilities. I can point to a legal company and talk about the work we've done with H&R Block with tax returns in the US, and they can see the relevance of it to them. We can have some of these capabilities up and running within 3 months. We can have clients doing it for hundreds of thousands of dollars to get an enterprise grade, broadly deployed capability. It's not, 20, 30, $50 million. Right? So this is granular. I had a company approach me the other day, a team of 15 data scientists in Brisbane. They built a fantastic client engagement nervous system. It went in and detected all of the interaction that citizens were having with one of Australia's largest local governments. It went and understood which service area was that talking about. Was it waste management? Was it roads? Was it cycling? And then it broke it down what issues are associated with cycling. And what's the tone and sentiment of the clients in relation to those issues? Now the council thought they had issues with their fixed cycling infrastructure. We're going to have to widen some paths, we're going to have to change some intersections to improve the flow of cyclists through it. The client engagement nervous system came back and said, your issue is with the behaviour of cyclists. This is your 45-year-old mammal. He hops on Strava, he's trying to live his personal best time getting from home to work, and he cleans up mum and the 3 kids going through the botanic garden. Right? It's a different thing, and now they know because they have the exact evidence to back that up. They took all of the emails, they took the comments and complaints on their website, they took social media, mainstream media input, and once they analysed it and then could show them, they could look at the woods and see all of it, or they could dive down to the trees and specifically what are the lessons for us in terms of cycling. And this could be running in real time as this is occurring. Now that's a council, but that could apply to any organisation that's interested in what their clients are thinking. So, what is a cognitive capability? Mark picked this up early in his presentation. Really, we look at this as understanding that voice, text, image or video, reasoning on the basis of it, coming up with hypotheses, and we're not talking about keyword searches here. This is about content in context and the way that that information hangs together, and inferring and extracting ideas from it. This is a complaint. This is a request. This is a concern. This is just a gripe. And therefore, how should we go and deal with that? And then a process of continuous learning. There's one thing I'd say here. I said we're looking at augmented intelligence here rather than artificial intelligence. Now you could switch on your learning to have it automatically feed back into the system. That's not something we recommend because in the way you've built the system, it can start running off in a particular direction and take you away from what you want happening in your organisation. So we're providing the capabilities to feed that learning back into the system, but we use a human in the loop to support that process, and this is part of the roles that Mark was speaking about. The other thing we've found with cognitive is that there's a whole new way to interact with information. If we think of typical information management around data warehouses and business intelligence, let's get a report or let's give me a screen. But actually there's a whole new way we can interact. We worked with a third party in New Zealand and developed an avatar. Someone with a hearing impairment can read the lips of the avatar. The avatar is sitting there responding to the tone of the discussion you're having. I'm concerned, I'm happy, and to be able to interact effectively. The tax office, you'll love this, can look across a range of issues related to a taxpayer and see a 360-degree view of the taxpayer. 6,500 caseworkers save themselves an hour a day in productivity. So really powerful capabilities by building the right way to interact. And it's not one way. If it's a contact centre, it may be something. If it's robotic process automation, it may be another. If you're on an oil rig with Woodside, it might be another. Deakin University has set up this capability for students coming in for Oakwood to ask questions, to understand how they could engage with the university as they first set foot on campus. Sadly, the most frequently asked question from the students was, how do I find a friend? That's really sad, isn't it? But one of the interesting things about it was, this became a powerful thing for them. They were getting a better understanding of the students. They were now able to think, how do we structure things so that we can better respond to students and engage them? You're not going to see that in a row, a cell or a column. And it's like having a group of blind people try to describe an elephant just by touching it. If they're only touching one part of the elephant, they're not going to be able to get the full picture. You have to be able to bring the whole picture together. The cognitive capabilities can be very powerful in doing that. Now, how do you remember this? And people talk to you about cognitive computing, URL. Understand, reason, and learn. URL. We threw on interact just to confuse people. So let me give you a quick example of this. Woodside, I mentioned lessons learned. They get there, they've got 30 years of operations in liquefied natural gas. Big offshore platforms, wells drilled down into hundreds, thousands of metres. a big fridge and cleaning factory ashore in the Pilbara that's cleaning that and compressing the gas and then shipping it off into Asia. So fantastic capability, market leading. And they saw, as new entrants were coming into the market, a whole drain on their skilled resources going off to Shell, to Chevron, to Impex and other companies. Now, this weight of corporate knowledge they had was sitting there in project plans, in engineering descriptions, in operations documents from all of these years of operations. And they go into their document and record management system and they do a keyword search for their area of interest and invariably wouldn't find the answer they're after. They had an issue that seabirds would love landing on their offshore oil and gas platforms, actually on the helo deck. It's flat, it's dry, stable, but then a helo would come into land, a flock of birds would take off, the two of them would meet, and it's very dangerous for everyone. So they went into their document record management system. Where have we designed a system to mitigate bird strike? This is what they call it, bird strike. Couldn't find it. Went to their senior engineers and operators, where have we done this? I think we have. But no one could remember where they'd done it. We were still building this first use case for Watson at the time. I went into Watson, and we hadn't taught Watson the term bird strike. Watson already knew English. We taught Watson some of the language of oil and gas. But Watson could infer enough, this is the reasoning part, infer enough to know what bird strike meant and said the Angel platform a decade ago, they designed a slatted helo deck. It was like a micro version of a cattle grid. Birds hated standing on it, find to walk across with your safety boots, helo skids could come in and land on it. Fantastic. Not only that, but here is the design. Here's the trial and error we went through. Here's the subcontractor who did the design for us. Here's the Woodside personnel, why didn't you remember, who did the review of the design for us. Right? So, in one question, they saved themselves more than a year in trial and error. They saved themselves millions of dollars in prototypes and designs and contracting to know that they already had a proven design. They had 10 years of operations that showed that they mitigated that risk. So, very powerful capability. So, let me talk to the contact centre for a second. I just want to use this as a proxy. Traditionally, we're seeing our programmatic systems in the contact centre, our web front end for online banking, booking, airline flights, checking in, what have you. A programmatic approach. You can enter that information. And any other queries you have, you then divert to the contact centre. What if we can take the capability to understand the question from a client, regardless of the way they answer it? Let's think of the intent. So I'm contacting an insurance company. My daughter's pranged my car. I've had a bingle. I'd like to lodge a motor vehicle insurance claim. All the same intent, I'd like to lodge a motor vehicle insurance claim. But to understand that regardless of the way it's asked. Right? And then to be able to take that and say, okay, I need to ask you now for your registration details. I need to get these details from you in order to process this for you. So I can start first by understanding the question or understanding the intent of the question regardless of the way it's asked. Understanding that information, reasoning to get the question right, and then running through a step of processes. And that works very effectively in enabling us to answer a lot of questions and put a very capable chatbot in place in an organisation. And some people are trying to take a programmatic approach, and effectively what they do is they do something you can already do, but just a different way. Well, that's not saving anyone any money, it's not driving any efficiency, it's not taking you anywhere. So, what we're able to do is take that Q&A capability, basic Q&A, and enable you to answer a lot more questions with a virtual agent. In testing, 80% of the people using the virtual agent prefer it over having a chat with a live agent. It's more responsive, the answer of better quality, and it can drive a lot of volume. We then go to deep Q&A. So if I say, what's my account balance, I can take a programmatic approach once I've worked out that's what you want, to say I'll go to the CRM and pull your account balance out. If I want to top up a mobile, there's a set of processes I'll go through to top up a mobile, right? But if I'm sitting there saying, what does it take to qualify for lifetime gold frequent flyer status? Well, I probably need to go and search through a whole heap of information to find the answer there. Understand thousands of documents, reason on the basis and say, here you go, here's an answer that answers that question. Or what if I'm a self-employed contractor and I'm after the home loan product that's best suited to me? That's not, if then else. This is actually searching through PDSs and brochures and what have you, which products are best suited. Here's our recommendation. I have a level of confidence that this is the right answer. Right? So that's a deep Q&A capability, and that's really coming up with the answer using the cognitive capabilities and enables us to go further down the curve. But we can go further than that. What if we have a level of empathy and we understand all of the questions that are being asked through the contact centre, through the virtual agent, through your live agents, various, and can break it down and use that to be teaching Watson how to react? Or what about during a discussion? Remember the old days of the taxi IVR systems, and you'd say, 28 Sydney Avenue Forest. 28 Sydney Avenue, and you'd start yelling down the phone. Now this tone should be an indication that there's something wrong here. But what if the virtual agent says, look, it sounds like you're getting frustrated. Perhaps if we back, what's the intent of what you're trying to do? An icebreaker question to try and redirect and get to the heart of it. Or perhaps you're notifying the contact centre supervisor, if you've got a live agent there, let's get this person onto a live agent so that we can take the heat out of this situation. Or after the event, what questions have we been asked? And these blocks here are the questions. They're really a Swiss cheese. There's holes in questions we haven't been able to answer. Well, how do we then use that to learn and then go and fill it out? And the key thing for the retained staff is, what are they going to be doing now? What roles are they going to perform? How do we upskill them? Much as tellers were upskilled when ATMs came into place, how do we put them into play? And the thing that I would look at here is, it's worthwhile looking at what happened with offshoring. In offshoring, they started at the top of the curve here. High volume, low complexity activities, call centres. Right? They then went to full service contact centres. They went to software development in offshore and various other business processes. And they moved their way down the curve. That's what's my expectation is going to happen with the contact centre space. And I also think it's going to happen in the RPA space, as Mark mentioned. Robotic process automation, we're taking a programmatic approach, which is like the web box at the top left there. If this, then this, else this. But what if someone sends an email? You can't program something on how to respond to an email. But Watson can look at an email and say, this is a request for something. This is an attempt to pay an invoice. This is a complaint. Right? This is a series of things. We need to deconflate this and treat it as a number of separate things. That's understanding the question, so then you can set off a series of programmatic actions to deal with it. What if you're getting the query, you have to go and respond, and it can come and show you, here's indicative responses that we think are suitable to answer this question. And then an operator can sit there and say, yes, this is the right answer for that. It's got all the background, the research behind it to give the appropriate answer to the client. So this is powerful, and not just in contact centres in RPA, but if I look at oil and gas, Woodside's got 14 cognitive use cases in production, raft of different things. They've looked at areas where they can drive volume, look at the complexity that Watson can do with early, and then move down the curve with more complexity. Okay. So I'll just give you a quick demo of a few things around the virtual agent, if that's okay, and I'm getting the wind up here, so I'll try and spending way too much time here. This is actually a development tool. Pretty scary that I'm showing you a development tool as a live demonstration. More so for me than you'll understand. So Watson Virtual Agent is a chatbot capability. We built hundreds of pre-built intents. So these are called capabilities. And if I can drive this, here's a whole raft of things that I could do in terms of setting things up for a client. in terms of account management. How do I change my account name, privileges, authorised users, etc. And just like switching off your mobile data roaming for different apps when you go overseas, you can sit there and say, we want that on, we want that on. We've got a pack here for telco. We've got a pack of questions for retail banking. We've got a pack of questions set up for general customer service. There's another one for utilities. And we're adding more all the time. These are pre-built intents ready to go, and you just switch them on, switch them off. And if you want to go in and modify the way it answers the question, I can go into it. For account name change, I might want to flick that to a human agent. I can readily set that up. What were you thinking? I'll get you a live one. Let's say I want to change that. I can quickly go in and modify it to change it. Or if I just want to give them a text thing to say, you know, here's the answer to that question, I can just give them text. Or I can provide them a different conversation for it. So very easy to go in and modify things to run it. Let me just give you a quick demo here. Let's say I want to now I'll put a few spellos in that. I'm trying to find no, I've probably put too many spellos there. Technology, gotta love it. So it's now looking to find the nearest store. Now I could put current location in or zip code. This is a US system, so let me go with that. And they go with 5 digits, so I'll go with that. So here's the locations that we've got, that we've entered here. Now I can easily go across to the capabilities here. I can set up the locations of the stores, I can set up store opening hours, I can set up details around them, and clients can come in and ask their questions. Now, the way we ask questions, someone could ask the question in a myriad of ways, and it'll pick it up. Maybe not with too many spelling errors, as I've just proven to you. But we go through in the testing regime with clients, and within a month, we can have a client with all their questions set up, ready to ask for their initial minimum production capability. Within 3 months, we can have them in production. So it's a very powerful capability. Royal Bank of Scotland, 30% reduction in contact centre staff through their initial deployment. So really powerful, tangible capability. And I would say to you, the last 6 months in Australia, telcos, banks, utilities, all hopping on board in terms of leveraging these sort of capabilities. You want to provide these through Facebook Messenger and ask your questions through your social media channel, easily done. So it's very powerful, and we'll see this transformation coming forward. I think that's enough for me. I'll just finish on one final thing, going back to my presentation. You want to see this? It's one thing to talk about this, show you a little demonstration. It's a fairly piddly demonstration. Here's a heap of sites that are in production around the globe. Right. Gents looking to buy a diamond ring for your dearly beloved. Great site there where you can use the cognitive capability to find the appropriate wedding ring, up to millions of dollars, if that's your thing. TEDx. Any TEDx lecture, just say, what are you trying to find? I'm after the meaning of life. And it will take you to any TEDx lecture where that's mentioned. It will cue you to the point in that video where that is mentioned, 5 seconds before it, and it will start playing it. And we're doing a similar thing for a university in Sydney at the moment, where it takes you to any lecture in any department and cues you to the point that the topic you're interested in is being discussed. So imagine studying for your exam and that differential calculus for 3D figures or whatever it is, you go and put that in and it'll take you to that boring lecture. You don't have to watch the whole thing. It takes you exactly where that's mentioned and shows you through it. So production site's there, and I think we're providing those slides to you. Go and have a look. You know, kick some tires. Thank you very much.
So we've heard about the automation market and where it's at, and we have witnessed one of the AI technologies in action. So now let's talk a bit about what it means for our jobs. So today we wanted to make sure that we touch on a few different elements, what it means for individual jobs, for the companies, and give you some of the industry examples. So when we talk about the impact of automation, there are different numbers that come up in newspaper headlines. The Forrester predicts that approximately 25% of roles within a particular job will be automated by 2019. And the impact of the disruption overall will impact up to 44% of jobs, which is an equivalent of 5.1 million. I know that job losses make better headlines than job creation opportunities, but we think that those estimates are not really taking into consideration the net impact on jobs, because I'm sure you can appreciate that the implementation of an automation solution will need a fair bit of human support in order to implement, to manage, maintain. The solutions are not an off-the-shelf solutions just yet, so there is an effort to implement, to create an infrastructure. Also, companies are taking time in order to figure out what's the right operating model when you do implement the AI solutions. And lastly, when we talk about the technology, some of the tools are not quite independent yet, so you do need that intervention when you program, when you maintain and monitor. So there are different schools of thought, as I said, but no matter which one you choose to believe, there's one thing they all talk about, which is job polarization. And this is something we've seen happening in Australia over the last decade or so, which is an increase in the number of high-skilled jobs and a decrease in the number of middle to low-skilled jobs. And automation is changing the definition of what the skilled job really is. So there are a few jobs like machine operation, clerical and admin tasks. They really have a high probability of automation. And there are a few factors that impact that. So the probability of a particular job or role being automated is really a function of how much involves physical manipulation and precise perception. So think of a role of a surgeon, and we see that on the left-hand side under the services. So you can program the bot to do a precise incision. However, if the patient should move or a complication occurs, the technology is not that great to adjust to those changes. The second element is creative intelligence. So we have computer programs that replicate art. However, the bots are not truly artistic. So they do follow the set of the rules and scenarios, whereas a true unrestricted creation capability is not there. And lastly, the social intelligence. So we see a lot of jobs in the professional services like solicitor, or even you take the public relations manager. It's hard to imagine a board performing a two-way conversation, conducting a negotiation, or showing empathy. So do we think that the fully automated workforce is going to take place within the nearest future? No, but what we will see though is we'll see the transformation of the workforce, where a physical employee will work hand in hand with a virtual employee. We'll see improvement in productivity, and we'll see a high number of new jobs created. When we talk about the companies, and there are a few questions that are asking themselves today, how do we make sure that we take the most of the automation technology? There are a few different lessons that we've learned with our clients through their automation journeys. One question is around the basic infrastructure. So when you do implement an automation solution, how do you make sure that it is stable enough? Now you have all the multiple users interaction with this technology. So to have a proper architecture in place will be really important. Second question is, who do you put in to lead an automation project? We've seen a lot of clients leave it with an IT department, and it hasn't really yielded the benefits they were after, because there are so many other skills than just technical aptitude that are required to make sure that automation project is successful. We're talking process re-engineering, problem solving, some of the basic knowledge of organization restructure. There's also a broader question of an operating model. How do we fit the virtual employee into the overall workforce? And then what is the plan in order to scale the automation solution? But the question is not only how the job is done, the question is also where the job is done. Because automation is really becoming a competition to the traditional business process outsourcing. So let me give you some benchmarks. It probably costs approximately $10K a year to operate a virtual employee, which is a really compelling business case. And on top of the financial benefits, it would also help companies to regain control of the operations, as the transparency and the auditability of the processes is much higher. It will also help them to shorten the process improvement cycle, because you no longer need to retrain or upskill your employees. You just need to tweak the code. And also it completely eliminates the human factor out of the equation. So the quality and the stability of the processes goes up. And we see a lot of BPO providers today being really concerned about it. In fact, I just came back from Manila last weekend, where I was helping one of the US telco clients to relaunch the call center. And we have seen a few presentations where we talked about potential partnership, and all of the BPO providers were talking about automation in some way or form. Chatbots, natural language processing tools, etc. So there are some of the industries that have a higher degree of automation, and some of them are no longer news for all of us. Like, for example, manufacturing. We've seen machines replace human labor in the production line a long time ago, but this industry continues to be disrupted with the 3D printing technology, etc. There are other cases like auto and transportation. In fact, a week ago, I think in one of the newspapers, Vickers was talking about the project where they work with the manufacturers to test driverless cars on the roads of Melbourne later this year. On the transportation side, an analytics and automation is really used to predict the route optimization, to assess the spare capacity of the vehicles, etc. There are also some textbook examples of what automation can do, and all of us as consumers experience in our everyday life. So retail, online retail, eBay, Amazon, some of the communications and media technologies. There's also a second tier of industries that we do see being more disrupted. So when we talk about aerospace and defense, we know that planes these days can autopilot. Auto takeoff and auto landing is possible as well. Auto takeoff is just not allowed yet, but there is a capability. So Boeing is currently researching the concept of pilotless commercial planes. So the technology is there. They're just trying to figure out some of the more practical elements of, what happens if a passenger has a heart attack. Do we stop the aircraft? Do we turn around? How do we do it? So it is a process that's currently taking place. The energy market. A lot of energy retailers are currently looking at the digital transformation of the entire value chain, from the process of customer acquisition and activation, through to measuring the consumption using the smart meter technology, and even providing automated invoicing and some of the general or basic maintenance capability through smart home technology. And also financial services, the reporting, the financial analysis, some of the healthcare jobs as well, as we talked about, the surgeons or medical examinations. So do we think that automation will impact jobs? Yes. Do we think that the fully automated workforce will take place? From where we stand today, considering the technology, the economical constraints, probably not in the next few decades. However, there is a case for some sort of government intervention to make sure that individual workers are prepared for the transition and companies have the right support to help them make it happen. And also, as we see some of the industries will be more impacted than the others, there is a case to make sure that the benefits from automation are equally distributed. So I'm going to hand it over to Rob to talk a bit about macroeconomic impact.
Thanks, Daria. This is working. Excellent. All right, so I get to sort of wrap it up and talk a little bit about sort of some of the more macro factors. And I should explain, are there people out there who enjoy disaster movies? Michael Bay, 2012, Deep Impact, any of those sort of big sort of disaster movies? I'm going to sort of imagine this is the AI speech that touches on a little bit of that, right? And the reason is that Daria and Mark have talked about what is the impact on the workforce, and we've talked about the fact that we're sort of at the peak of the hype curve. We've talked about the fact that when we go around, it's select job roles rather than the entire job. When we talk about where there are impacts, very big impacts in call centres, very big impacts in back offices, but there are whole clusters and families of jobs that aren't yet able to be impacted. All of that is true, right? But that doesn't mean that those areas that are affected won't be affected in a big way, right? And that doesn't mean that we're not going to experience shocks to the system. And to pick on some of the numbers that Daria put out there, if we talk about 25% of the workforce being affected by this, that's a big deal, right? Under anyone's language. So when we started looking at this, and this was originally kicked off by a discussion by one of the deputy governors of the Bank of England, and he talked about, okay, so this is about 3 years ago now, talked about, well, how do I figure out what the impact of this could be? Because it's an unknown, right? And it's one of those Donald Rumsfeld unknown things, right? The only real examples that we have is to go back in history and look at previous revolutions, previous industrial revolutions. And just to pick on them, what we did was we went back and we tried to look at them, we tried to learn some of the lessons and try and understand what that might mean and what some of the impacts might be. So just starting on the left here, the first industrial revolution. So 1800s, United Kingdom, they've had the agrarian revolution where farming productivity has come right up. As a result of farming productivity, crop rotation, enclosure, all of this sort of stuff, a large number of agricultural workers have become unemployed and they've all moved to the cities. And as part of this, what happens is that they start to industrialise, steam power, the early factories, etc., etc. If you want to understand what that looked like, go and read Charles Dickens, right? That's what we're talking about, okay? Now, the idea here is that machinery has started for the first time in history, at a mass level, started to replace human labour. You've moved from the spinning jenny making clothes or making woolen clothes to woolen cotton mills where they're able to process thousands of them. We've got child workers in there doing all sorts of stuff. It's not that much fun for anyone. But what we end up with is we end up with a huge leap in productivity, and the workforce and what the workforce does fundamentally changes, right? And we can talk about how that did, and various economists who made various predictions at the time. We then come through and we entered this second industrial revolution. So here what we're talking about is the advent of electricity and electrical power coming through and applying. We're talking about production lines. We're talking about these sorts of techniques coming on board. And again, we see a large amount of disruption to the industry. Not as much as the first industrial revolution. We've got a little bit better at handling and planning it, but we still see significant amounts of disruption, particularly to established industries. You see companies go bankrupt. You see new companies be created, and some of the global corporate giants that we still know today. We then end in this third industrial revolution, which is where electronics and information technology come through. So we're talking here from the 1970s forwards, really a big peak through the 1990s, 2000s, and we're still seeing the impacts of this come through today. Interestingly, it's very, very difficult or it has historically been very difficult to measure the actual productivity impact of this third industrial revolution when if you go back and look at some of the data and some of the statistics, what you see is you can see a clear lift in productivity in the United States, but you don't see that clear lift in productivity in the rest of the world. You don't see it in many of the other developed countries until a little bit later. Interestingly, if you go back and run a correlation as to that lift in productivity in the United States, it correlates very, very tightly with the rollout of the Starbucks stores. So it could be information technology, it could be caffeine. I don't know. And then you end up in this fourth industrial revolution, which is what we're talking about now. Now, in all of these things, lessons here are around disruption, around disruption to existing businesses, existing industries getting shut down, new ways of working, new things coming through. And just to sort of bring it to life for you, if I wanted to sort of try and describe this in a picture for you. Over here on the left-hand side, this first industrial revolution, imagine you're making a car, right? And what you've got is you've got a single individual or a couple of individuals huddled around one car, and they're making the car themselves, right? They're all gathered around to make the car. By the time the second industrial revolution comes along, we've moved on to a production line, and everyone's doing their individual job on that production line as the car moves down. When we get to the third industrial revolution, there are no longer people on the factory floor doing this. What we've got is we've got robots on the factory floor doing this, and there are supervisors standing on the gantries overlooking the floor. And what the humans are doing is the humans are making sure the machines are running, they're checking for defects and handling exceptions, and they're dealing with the fact that, how do I maintain, manage, and improve the machines and the processes. And then we come on to the fourth industrial revolution. The reason I bring that analogy is that this fourth industrial revolution is applying that sort of thing to things like back offices, call centres, drivers, many of those sorts of tasks. So, what does this mean and what could this look like? So I talked a little bit about how this is going to be very disruptive. There's two big questions then. Where are we going to end up and how do we get there? Right? Now, I've got a little picture, and you're not actually going to be able to see this from the back. So, if you do get curious about this, come and have a look. This is Fifth Avenue, New York City, 1900, Easter morning in 1900. This is Fifth Avenue, slightly different angle on Fifth Avenue, New York City, 13 years later. Easter again, it's Easter morning again. Now, on the left-hand side here, that is the only motor vehicle in that picture. Everything else is horse and carriage. Okay? On the right-hand side, and it's actually here, that is the only horse and carriage in this picture. Everything else is a motor vehicle. So within 13 years, you watched a fundamental change to the way that people moved around New York. Now, if you think about what were the implications of that, anyone who manufactured carriages, if you haven't moved to manufacturing cars, you're out, right? All of the people who used to look after the horses, the grain, bringing all of those things in to make sure that that entire system worked, that's all gone, right? The people who used to drive this, now if you think about a carriage, yes, there was a person who used to drive the carriage, but there's always also someone who used to have to look after the horses. When they arrived at a particular destination, someone had to make sure that there was water. All of that's gone, right? We are likely to see similar disruptions in the Australian economy as a result of the current changes coming through. Which is the question: what do we do with the transition? So, where could we end up? This is kind of tough, right? Again, this is the Michael Bay, and I'm making this up here, really, because we don't really know where we're going to end up. We can make a couple of predictions, though, based on historical stuff. We are likely to see new jobs emerge. So there will be new jobs, and we can start to see some of those already. So we're already seeing cognitive engineers come through. We're already seeing people helping to train AIs, right? We're already seeing people move into entirely new spheres of roles around how I implement this, how I manage this, how I organise for this, how I design and redesign this. There is likely to be a shift in value of jobs. Now, as a former economist and as a person who's interested in all of this sort of stuff, there are likely to be jobs in call centres and in other sort of lower value areas that are likely to be disrupted very, very heavily and very, very quickly. Some of the higher end jobs will also be disrupted. I'm a management consultant, and someone suggested the other day, or didn't suggest, they told me that people are working on designing software to replace me. It's fine. It won't be as funny. The second thing around this is that it's the lower end jobs that will probably lose more of them, right? Simply because there are more of those jobs to go. So if you imagine at the moment, we have around Australia lots and lots of people driving trucks from, say, Sydney to Adelaide, right? Those jobs are going to go. Right? They will be replaced by self-driving trucks at some point in the next decade, maybe next 15 years, but it'll happen in our lifetime. And then the question that says, well, what's going to happen? Are we going to end up with a total lower number of jobs? This is an interesting question. It's an interesting question intellectually, obviously, but it is a very, very real question. So many of you will have read things like, should we be creating a universal basic income? Should we be creating a living wage? What should we do? This is all a challenge for us. We haven't had to deal with this sort of problem for a long time. If you do want to think about when we last dealt with this, think back to the Great Depression in Australia. For anyone who's ever been down to Brighton or anywhere along there, sort of through those beaches there, you will have noticed those sort of big sea walls that are built, the big basalt or bluestone walls that are built. A lot of those were built during the Great Depression by effectively unemployed labour, where the government put people in to go and do that sort of activity. Living wages, activity, handling people who have previously had jobs, those jobs no longer exist, what do we do with them, how do we retrain them? These are all big questions to answer. So, how might the government answer these jobs? How might the government answer these questions? How might we answer these questions? Well, we've got all the way over here on the right a free market. So this is Industrial Revolution number 1. Laissez-faire, let's step back, let's let the economy and the market take care of itself. The idea here is that no change to restrictions, no sponsored training programs, no changes to the existing system. Obviously the impacts of that are that yes, wealth disparity increases very, very quickly. You end up with a poor underclass, a very, very wealthy upper class. You end up with mass unemployment. You end up with an enormous social disruption. Over on the left here, we end up with the planned economy. We effectively tax somehow the wealthier among us, or the more successful companies, the ones that are managing to break through and break free as part of these results. We use that money to go and fund the people who are most disaffected by this particular set of changes. We invest in publicly available training. We potentially create a basic income or a living wage, and we try and smooth the transition through this. There's also a piece here about trying to sort of hold back the tide of this change. I don't think that's possible, but it's been discussed. And then there's somewhere in the middle where again we play around with taxes, we play around with training, and we do something. I suspect if you ask me to put money on this, I suspect in Australia we're going to be somewhere here on that continuum. At a guess, right? Just based on the way that we tend to behave, but that's my opinion. I certainly don't think we'll end up over here. So, look, that brings us to the conclusion of this, which we're running a couple of minutes late, so I apologise. Hopefully, as I said, you've left here, or you're going to leave here with more questions than you arrived, because certainly we won't have been able to answer all of them. I just want to make a quick plug. We do a number of these breakfasts through the year, as you can see. We've got a couple coming up here in September, Amazon, Alibaba and the Millennials. We have a colleague of ours from the US who has done quite a bit of research into millennial buying behaviour and how that is changing. And I'll sort of just cut to the answer. It's changing the way that organisations engage with the consumer, how they react, what they do, and it's moving very much, or it's moved from a broadcast to a conversation to now, in fact, a pull conversation with the consumer. So look, with that, I'm going to say thank you very, very much. We're around afterwards, happy to discuss, but I appreciate that everyone has busy lives that you may need to get back to. Thank you for coming along. So the big debate at the moment, so I'd like to